Welcome to episode number quattro, episode number four. Welcome, welcome. Today we are having a conversation with David Beckmeyer. I found this guy because of his podcast. So he actually has a podcast that's called um, Outrage Overload, which is very interesting. So what really poked my interest is how he coined his podcast, Outrage Porn. I was like, what's this about? So, anyways, I'd like us to listen to this quick 1 minute video, and then I'm gonna come behind with some comments.
Once we labeled it as outrage, it was this light that went on.
Are you on social media? Do you watch news on TV, online? Do you get political campaign emails, texts? Then you've seen it. Outrage porn. Messaging designed to evoke outrage. I'm David Beckemeyer, and this is Outrage Overload, a podcast about our unhealthy relationship with the outrage industry.
It's not just that they're different and you dislike them, you think they're bad.
There's not a magic wand that we're going to be able to wave.
I've obviously disconnected from people, family members, friends.
But it's also about hope.
We have to be optimistic.
There are all these areas where we're really not so divided, and that's where we need to turn our attention.
Maybe you should listen to me once in a while.
Coming soon to wherever you get your podcasts.
So, the name of the podcast is Outrage Porn, and he basically started the podcast because he came to the realization that there seemed to be intention behind the type of messaging, political messaging, in this country. And there's some truth to it, by the way. And we did like a rundown memory lane. We went back and tried to figure out if this was new. We figured out it's not new. We also figured out that the reason it's so prevalent today is because of the power of social media, and the speed at which information is being distributed. But political outrage messaging goes way back when, so it's really not new. What's new is the speed at which it spread and the impact you're able to have. You're basically able to sway opinions quite literally in real time with social media. And that's kind of the argument that's made around both the 2016 election and the 2020 election. But the actual idea of manipulating or messaging or outrage messaging is really not new. Anyways, I really, really enjoyed this conversation, and it was very, very enlightening to me, and I hope you do too. So I'm going to put in the description below the how to reach out to David if you want to. The link to his website, it's right here, what we're looking at, the Outreach Podcast. He has some samples. Like this is an episode from one of his podcasts. You can join, you can listen to him on wherever you consume your podcast from, YouTube, Spotify, and wherever else. So David seems to be a gentle guy, in my opinion, after talking to him for a few minutes. Um, I really, really enjoyed the conversation. I hope you do too. And I hope that this conversation actually teaches you something about political messaging and the media in general. So when you start hearing things like fake news, or you start hearing things like the media lies, there is some truth to it. You know how they say there's no smoke without fire, and you have to take it on a case by case basis, which I understand is kind of tedious because our brains just like to take the shortcut to just get to the answer, really, really fast. But when it comes to certain things like political messaging, when it comes to how our politicians communicate to us, we really, really have to be cautious about the messaging that they give us. And we got to realize that every time you hear a political message from either side of the aisle and it triggers you and you feel upset, like, how could this be? How could that be? Instead of just running with it, use that as your cue to dig deeper. So don't just let the outrage be an outrage. Try to figure out. And if you start practicing this exercise, one thing that will happen is you won't get as much outrage because you tend now to know the truth, to get closer to the truth, because the less you research, the further away you are from the truth. So if you see a 10-second bite that pisses you off, or if you see a 30-second message from some political guy from the left or the right that really sparks you and makes you upset, instead of just letting that obsession be what it is and just running with that message, use that as your cue to go a bit deeper to be able to understand what is actually happening at the end of the day. So, ladies and gentlemen, I hope you enjoyed this conversation because I very much did. Thanks for listening. Go ahead and hit like, subscribe, and share. And this message might actually enlighten someone else. Thank you very much. This is Think with Armel, episode number 4. Enjoy. Bye bye.
Bye.
Okay, well, I think I'm good. I mean, I think we'll hopefully go somewhere. In terms of my show, so I'm a tech guy. I was formerly a tech guy for many, many years. Silicon Valley, tech
Okay.
companies, internet related, and so on. And then I did sort of Silicon Valley investing and things like that for a number of years. And I retired from that a few years ago,
Okay.
and sort of took up this journey of becoming a science journalist, sort of. So I don't really have any background in that per se. I have done speaking, public speaking and stuff, but not real journalism. And so, that's been all sort of new as I kind of figured that out. And I since I don't have that background as kind of a radio personality or anything like that, I just try to bring, excuse me, I just try to bring, sort of authenticity. I'm just a guy that's
Yeah, that's
curious
okay. Mhm.
with a little bit of science,
Which
kind of
is what I
curiosity.
actually like about you, because you have no anger. You just like, hey, let's just really figure this stuff out. What's going on here? Yeah.
Yeah, so that's what got me. And so kind of what got me interested in this topic is, as you kind of already noted, that we're all kind of inundated with this outrage stuff. And, there's people in my life. We had, first of all, you sort of had even the lead up before the Trump election, but then you had Trump get elected, and then you kind of, a lot of people started to get much more, like you said, they don't even want to talk to you if you mention you have an
Yeah.
opinion on something, things like that. And that kept getting worse and worse, and people blocking each other on social media, this kind of stuff. And then basically even not even talking to people in real life anymore and giving up lifelong friendships and family members, stuff like that. Then you kind of had COVID and the lockdowns, and it just kept getting worse. So
Yeah.
it was just like this was in my personal life directly, but also just people in my circles, like being like this, like seeing these people disconnect, and everybody's got a story like that almost. Like almost everybody
Oh
has
yeah,
some
I
kind of
do.
story.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. So then I said, okay, so that's kind of took me to the, maybe that was my rock bottom, if you want to say something like that, where it was just like, okay, what is going on here? Like, this is all, I think my son getting off social media, he's 30, I think he's going to be 33. So he's kind of in your group here. And,
Yeah.
he was never like an influencer or anything like that, but he was very active on, various social media platforms. And so when he, talked to me about, he got off, when I found out he was off social media, I go, are you off social media now? And he's like, yeah, I canceled all my accounts and I don't get on anymore. And I'm like, what's that about? And then we had a conversation about it, and he was just talking about this idea of this outrage stuff was just turning him into a outrage, machine. He was just out there
Yeah.
getting in fights online and stuff. And it turned into where the fight was more important than the issues you were talking about for him, which is very out of character for him because he's not like that at all. I mean, so he's gone kind of on a mission to go in the other direction now and really reach out and talk to people on the other side, stuff like that, and just talk to people in general. So for me, that was like a huge trigger too, as well. As like, okay, if my son's going to do this, then this is pretty bad. And that just took me down this road of starting to investigate all this stuff. So that's kind of how I got where I am now.
Okay.
So I'm retired from another thing, but I do this as my main thing now. I don't really have, I mean, I have a lot of other hobbies and stuff, but I don't have another business or anything I'm promoting. This is just a kind of a passion project that I'm working on now, and it's been great. I mean, I've gotten to meet and get to make more than just meet, but actually establish relationships with scientists from all over the world and authors and all kinds of things. So it's been very cool.
That's awesome. That's awesome. And I'm not gonna lie, when I first read the thing so how did you coin the term outrage porn? Because it threw me completely up, and then when I got it, I was like, that makes it, that you hit the nail on the head, and you quote those examples from Trump and Biden and the MSN and Fox, and I was like, yeah, I just didn't. So to me, when I read that, I was like, this just sounds like American politics to me, but you really boxed it out as compared to say something like fake news, which is kind of along the same lines. But this outrage thing is it's actually a thing. I didn't really think about it until, but the way you boxed it out makes perfect sense. I didn't think there was intent behind it, but it sounds as though there really is some intention behind this stuff.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's a bunch of people that benefit from keeping us riled up and angry all the time.
Oh wow, that's
The
insane.
news media does, politicians do, of course, the social media platforms, that's how they basically keep you engaged and keep you online is by getting you riled up. And so there's so many people that benefit from it that it's very well, it's very much intention. Yeah. And I like the term too. I wasn't literally the first person to use it. Somebody named Reader, I think from New York Times, I'm forgetting now, Chris. I know I can't remember his name, but I think the New York Times used it before, but they kind of use it in a more specific way, sort of mostly talking about social media. And I love the term because I think it captures so
Oh
much
wow,
of it.
yeah, it does.
You sort of get the two aspects of it. One, outrage to me kind of is a blanket term for lots of different emotions, but mostly anger and
Hmm.
sort of I'm the other person's guilty, so it's like a you know it's like a
By
moral
default,
superiority almost, right? So
yeah.
you want to see this other side do these bad things because it makes you feel better about yourself. And then the porn part of it is because we really are addicted to it. Like we go back for more. It's not just that the people do it, it's that we want it. Like we seek it out. And even if you don't know you're seeking it out, you kind of are. Like you're going to your favorite news website or you're going to your favorite you know, Instagram follow, feed or whatever. So you're kind of seeking this stuff out and the algorithms obviously prove this out because that's how we keep seeing it because we keep clicking on it and liking it and
And
engaging with it.
comment and yeah, the most engagement, and I probably am guilty of this myself. Most people probably are. I can count on one hand the number of times I commented on something online, be it Facebook, I don't know, Instagram or whatever. That wasn't something that actually kind of triggered me. That was when I left Facebook probably like 2, 3 years ago. I was done with it a long time ago. But yeah, it definitely fosters engagement. I wonder if the other side of the coin is true. So do you think we can have as much engagement on social media if there was no outrage? Could that be true? Or nah, if there's no outrage, people don't really do much. They just read and just keep scrolling.
You mean if people were more um
Less
like
out.
of an activist mindset or something?
No, I mean like if there was nothing to trigger that outrage or that anger, if there was not so much of it, do you think there will be as much engagement on social media, period? Or do you think that
Right.
that's kind of built into social media? You need that for social media to actually work at scale or to really have that much engagement.
Y- Yeah, well, I think you can if there was enough other kinds of content that somehow also tapped into, your positive emotions, maybe. But what we know from a real, there's sort of a real life experiment proving this that, in the 20, was it shortly, I guess it was in the middle of the 2020 election season,
Okay.
Facebook, decided there was too much of this kind of stuff. And so they actually deactivated some of those aspects of their algorithm for a while. And to sort of bring down the temperature a bit.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, I mean, they decided they couldn't, they turned it all back on again after a while. They made it through the election, the 2020 election, they left it that way. But then right after the election, they just turned it all back on again. And because it was just like hurting their bottom line, like people weren't engaging the same way. They weren't staying online long enough, right? They want to get your eyeballs actively participating, signing back in more often, staying online longer. Those are all metrics they use to sell to their advertisers and charge more for ads, right? So they actually know, we know from a real life experiment that at least in that case, when you shut off that stuff, our engagement did go down. So, and they had to turn it back on to get their bottom line churning again.
Yeah. As a side note, are you familiar with Shamat Palihapitiya? The guy that one of the four guys on the All In podcast.
No, I don't think so.
So he used to work with Zuck at Facebook, and he helped grow them from about 20 million, users to roughly 800 million or so. But at the same time, he is very anti social media. I'm not sure how he gets to that point. But what's your take? So it takes a lot of engineering, it takes a lot of work and effort to build something like Facebook, right? To create value or whatever Facebook is trying to create. How do you compare and contrast that with the effects that it has on society? Because obviously we can clearly see that it's hurting us at this, in our political arena. It is hurting us in many ways. It's dividing us, it's creating outrage. It's basically people are using it to amplify negative voices, division, and so on and so forth. However, at the same time, it's something that was originally intended, to connect us, to bring us closer. How can these two things coexist, in your opinion? Like, how does that even make sense?
Yeah. Yeah, it's a great question because it's not as simple as, there are clearly benefits from it. So it's not just as simple as, you know, we should get rid of it for sure. Like it's
Yeah,
just a black and white thing. It's it's like there's nuance here, right? I mean, because there are potential social benefits, there's actual social benefits, but we also know, as you say, that there's a lot of negative consequences as well. And so so how do you thread that needle, right? What's the right answer here? And I don't think anybody has the exact answer, but I mean, there's a lot more they could do. How you change the financial incentive of it, though, is challenging. Um, and I don't ex because I have a sort of a theory that basically Silicon Valley, being in that industry for a long time, the Silicon Valley funding model is basically sort of incompatible with a healthy society. Like just the way to be profitable, the amount of profit and
yeah,
growth you have to demonstrate, there's like no ethical way to do it. Like there's no societal benefit way to do these things, right? And so this is a big challenge because these profits, if you compare, the Silicon Valley tech startup sort of model and how much growth they're um, sort of required to fulfill the needs of their investors, it's not like any other sort of normal business. It's not like a grocery store downtown. It's not like some other private business that someone engages in. And so it's on a whole different kind of plane.
yeah.
So exactly how you manage that is a challenge.
Yeah, because they quite literally create markets out of thin air with with the kind of products and services they develop. Because if you think about it, before Facebook, there was no real like social media at scale. Before Twitter and now X, there was really no group chats at scale. And when I think about it, I think they so I guess what you're saying is in order to create those markets, in some ways you kind of have to break society.
It seems that way. Nobody's cracked that nut in a way that does it yet.
So what do you think? Do you think the answer therefore is TikTok, or how do we? Because
No, no,
no.
go ahead. Sorry. No, not
So
TikTok for sure, because TikTok, the
it's
algorithm is controlled by a foreign national, and that's not good.
right. That's not good either. So that's a problem. They're basically doing what Google and Facebook are doing. However, it's been done outside of the US. That makes a bad situation worse.
Right.
Um, so how do we so how do we approach? I guess the first step is first of all being aware and recognizing that okay, this is a problem. And then the next step, I guess, it's kind of hard to find a market efficient solution. I think that's what you meant by nobody has cracked that nut yet. Because when you really think about it, there's really no, because the most obvious answer, which is never going to happen, is basically kill it all. You can't do that either because no one's going to let you.
Well, Well, I don't necessarily think that's the only answer. I mean, theoretically, if they had put less, if they didn't push those sort of outrage inducing content as much, like somehow that stuff was a little bit more buried, and
Mhm.
they pushed more of the more positive content, and or even just the more rationed content, like the more like reasoned arguments, like not necessarily just pushing the extreme views on either side or about any issue. um, I think that would have a big effect. And I think there's been studies that show the kinds of things you can do to help. I'm getting to where I'm hesitant to use terms like disinformation and misinformation because they can become weaponized, and I think we probably need new language around that. But in terms of sort of qualifying information, and there's been some studies showing that there are ways to do that besides just the little fact check boxes that don't really work as well. But you can inject like a sane, rational argument in a person's feed So they have options of seeing a more reasoned, particularly I think when you're talking about if it's a politically hot thing, where you can see some reasonable people and some reasonable debates from the other side, or reasonable positions, I should say, and reasonable arguments from the other side that would make you humanize things a little bit more and also see some of the nuance in it. So there's been research that shows those kind of things could work to avoid some of this outrage spiral. But,
Yeah.
how do you make that still fit it might mean that startups, you couldn't have a Facebook like startup at that profit level anymore. You could probably create a perfectly healthy, medium-sized enterprise, right? But you may not be able to create these insanely highly valued
I know.
companies with multi-billion dollar executives, right?
Yeah.
And, you know, that might limit a little bit. You might say, well, that's curtailing capitalism, but there are things. I've talked to legal scholars that talk about, like, the First Amendment is not necessarily absolute. Plus, it's got two sides to it. It's also got a side of it that says the government must promote quality information for people, not just sort of allow, right? So there's much more opportunity there to do things that still fit within the First Amendment, because people scream the First Amendment right away, and they most of the time aren't really understanding what the First Amendment's about. So there's lots of things we could do sort of technically. Now, as you're saying, how can you make that work as a market? How can you make that work? So, I mean, would it be okay to have a company that was only worth $500,000 instead of multi-billion, right? I mean, I'm okay with that,
Ah,
but Silicon Valley's not, right? They're not going to fund that company, so I would have to get funding in a more traditional way. Which there's lots of businesses that are perfectly traditional that we've probably never even heard of, that are multi-million dollar companies,
yeah.
hundreds of million dollar company, $500 million companies that make good profit. The people there have good livings. They're maybe not all billionaires, or maybe they're not going to become billionaires, but they're perfectly good businesses. Like, we
Yeah.
sometimes have to get that back in our head, that not every company has to become a Facebook
Facebook.
like,
Yeah.
level multi-bazillion company.
Yeah, I have a couple of thoughts here. So first, do you think that something like the community notes on X kind of is leaning towards what would be a market efficient solution for this? I think it is, but you could always, come up with something better, I guess. And then I guess the second thought I have is um how how do you well, the market is already set up as is. So do you think this is something that we could kind of like transplant, or we could legislate it into existence, like mandate social media platforms to have something like community notes? Is the solution what Elon says? Is the solution just speak the truth? Is that I kind of think it is, but I don't know, because people have opinions. Like maybe it's true for you, your truth, my truth, and all of that. But do you think the solution is kind of what X is attempting to do now?
Well, I think it's a model worth experimenting with. I still have some reservations about the sort of
The
ethics
community?
of whether they're implementing that in a good way. But I think it is a good model, or in a I don't know, equitable. What's the word I want to use? But I think
Rational,
it's a good model.
rational,
I
rational
think it's
market solution.
yeah. I mean, I think it's a model we definitely, and I think it's shown some promise, and I think it's a model that could be um, uh, tried more. And again, technically, you probably could mandate something like that, and I think it could still fit in a First Amendment, have no First Amendment issues potentially. But is there an appetite for that? Is there enough of a,
Yeah.
could you get this kind of thing through Congress? Maybe. I mean, you are starting to see some people coming to these ideas coming to light within Congress and within legislation. So you might start seeing some things like that. And it's a tread lightly thing, I think, because ultimately, and I think another one that could be a big improvement, though, is more transparency. So I think you could also legislate more transparency. So I think sort of the idea of an independent body that could review the algorithms and also review some of the internal data that we typically aren't able to see about what kind of societal effects these services are having. And if you had like a bipartisan independent review, there's not really a First Amendment issue about that, right? And we're not stopping them from keeping it private. We're not stopping them from having it patented. We're not forcing them to sell it or give it away. We're just saying it has to be shared to an independent body that can review it. And I think that would keep them a little bit more honest potentially if that kind of a body had some teeth and could report back to Congress, something like that. Maybe would have some teeth about enforcing those rules, stuff like that. I think that's one that is pretty easy to do, sort of within the Constitution. Like we aren't really violating anybody's rights to do something like that. And I think that could have a lot of value. That could start to bring out some of these worst aspects, and then that would help the legislators focus on, if they do want to do regulation, where to do it. And it would probably just keep the companies a little bit more honest anyway, because they really wouldn't want these public reports going out that that this part of their service is creating this horrible havoc in this population.
Yeah. So I tend to lean towards, I'm kind of a capitalist minded person. I tend to think that the market always gets what it wants, and the market always leads us to the correct answer, so to speak. So, do you think this is the fact that we actually do have this outrage situation? Is the social media algorithm entirely to blame, or is some of this actually part of what the market actually wants anyway?
Well, for sure. Yeah, for sure. I mean, it's a demand side problem for sure. I mean,
Yeah,
we
that's
want
what
the
I'm
stuff.
saying.
But I think I'm gonna push back on that the market always gets it right, because I think there are some things where
Mostly, yeah.
there's no market incentive to work. And I'm gonna maybe an example would be like emission controls on cars, right? Had we not forced the car companies to do that back in the 70s, they never would have done it, right? But so there was no market incentive to make them do that. But once there were regulations about the emissions, there were market incentives to do it better and come up with better cars. And so cars today are way better, they're way cleaner, everything else. And that never would have happened though if you let the market just run its course, right? Because there was no reason to stop doing emissions. There was no reason to change that. I don't think. I mean, I could be wrong, but I kind of lived through that, and I'm just not seeing. So, and I would say national parks, things like that. I mean, I don't think there's necessarily market incentives for things like national parks and stuff like that. So I do think there's spaces where public interest is misaligned with capital interests, and you
So
have to then have some kind of a other program that's something that's in
implement
line with the
something
public interest.
to
And
help.
I do agree with you that I wouldn't want that all the time. I'm not saying everything should suddenly become a state-run thing or something like that, or everything should be regulated to the ninth degree. But I do believe there are some things where there are no market incentives to fix it. And I also want to say that social media is not, you know, the root cause of all this. It's not like if we go down and play a detective here, we're going to find it was social media with a candlestick in the library. I mean, this is a more complicated problem than that. There's big societal problems. There's others, as I say, that are incentivized by this, the politicians themselves, the campaigns, others that that also feed into this narrative, and social media is just another part of it. So, I don't want to blame. I don't think social media is to blame for all of these problems. Again, it's sort of back to what you're saying. It's a mechanism where we can satisfy
Yeah,
our
just
demand for this stuff,
exactly.
right?
It's like a tool, just like a fork. You could eat with it, or you could do something else with it. You could use it either way, but you also have to recognize that there's a difference between a knife and a gun. Some tools are a little bit more powerful, and therefore you have to be a little bit more careful with how you use them. So I guess it's a mixed bag. Now, to what extent is it the responsibility of us citizens? I think that when you're in a society where people don't have a whole lot of time to gather information, people are caught up, in their job, in their lives, and they have like 5, 10 minutes. They'll watch a video, or they just want to watch their favorite news, their news channels, or listen to their favorite celebrity. And that's really about the extent of information they get to ingest. People don't really take the time, including me, to really go deep dive something and maybe I believe that we as, people and citizens of this country, we have to bear some responsibility around, how aware we are of what's going on in our country. And you can't just sit there and just blame the teacher or the whoever is giving you that information. I mean, he told you whatever clip you saw, whatever headline you read and got upset, you really can't just blame them. I mean, it's kind of like a tiger is gonna hunt, a lion is gonna hunt. Now, if you're the gazelle, your job is to get away from it, right? So they're gonna do what they're gonna do. That's what they're supposed to be doing. Now, you can argue as to whether it's right or wrong, but it's also you have to bear responsibility for the things that you ingest, for what you think, for what you say, and don't listen to somebody and then go do something and then turn around and say, "Well, I did this because he said I should do it." Well, you did it, so it's on you. So we kind of have to weigh that hat of, okay, be responsible, take accountability for whatever you think, say, and do. And maybe that's kind of where we need to start as a people. Like, be responsible for what you think, what you say, how you act, how you move around in the world, and don't sit there and just keep blaming everybody else for the fact, well, I heard this on MSN or I heard this on Fox News. Okay, you heard it, but did you take the time to figure out if what they were telling you was true? That's on you, right? They don't have any. They're not required to tell the truth. I think they should be, but they really aren't. They're just required to give you some type of information. They have an agenda. They have an editorial line. They have something. They have something they're trying to push. And it doesn't matter who. Everybody has an agenda. Most states do propaganda. You can like it or hate it. And that's just how the world is. And we need to step up and get educated, figure out what's going on. And I'm not saying this is gonna be easy, but I think that's got to be part of the solution. It has to be, because there's no other way. How else are people gonna figure out what's true? You know?
Well, and even yeah, and even want to figure out what's true, right? Even have that desire, right? And yeah, so you can say that some of this can fall back to, just becoming appreciative of that as a society, where we value that kind of critical thinking and learning about things. But it can be challenging, like you said at the beginning. We're just living our lives and we're trying to get through. We don't have that many hours in the day to research all these things, which is always, of course, a reason why it's always kind of funny that we don't have time to learn about a thing, but suddenly we'll act like we're an expert on it, even though we just heard about it like last
Yeah,
week
that's
and we're an
very
expert on it. So I think a lot of it is that humility that you probably don't know as much about it as you think, especially if the first
yeah.
time you ever heard of it was last week. And you were saying about like the people that have agendas, and some of that agenda is just to get you riled up. They don't, but and I want to be careful about saying the truth or not truth, because what's often there is they're not necessarily telling you lies. That's pretty rare, flat out lies. It does happen more often than not. They're just kind of leaving stuff out that might have made a clearer picture of what's going on, because
Or
they kind of
flipping
only
it.
want they're kind of flipping it or just adding the parts that make it kind of fit the narrative they want, and kind of leaving the parts out that might make you go, oh, maybe it's not as bad as I thought it was, or whatever, right? And so that's happening all over the place. And you know, and sometimes, even if you see a headline that's written that way, sometimes we have to remember that the headlines aren't even written by the person that wrote the article, right? The journalist wrote the article, and then, like the marketing team wrote the headline. So many times, even the headline that says something kind of outrageous, when you go read the whole article, you're like, oh, it's not as outrageous as that headline said. And then of course, but you can still find even that article might have left some stuff out, like you might want to say, it, maybe I need to look into this a little more. But and the challenge with that, a big challenge with that, is it goes against all of our natural sort
Yeah,
of
it's
innate tendency.
counterintuitive.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's counterintuitive, and it goes against our emotional sort of, even our biology, right? Like we kind of like the answer we got, and we don't really want to go find out if some of it may not be 100% right, or we're missing some parts, right? We sort of like, we want to. There's a term in psychology that has a totally silly name, but it's called the sense stopping rule. So in other words, it makes sense stopping doing any more work because I sort of got where I wanted to get to. And in some parts of life, that's true. Like, is the lion going to eat
Yeah.
me or not? I've made the decision. I can stop now. But like with other things, probably doesn't make sense to stop. You probably need to
Need to
keep
dig
looking a
some
little
more.
deeper.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. That is so true. Man, That's interesting. So what has this so looking at this, you've been around longer than I am, and I come from a culture where we tend to listen to our elders for a whole bunch of reasons. But my reason why I tend to like to ask questions to older folks is just because I know that experience is the best teacher, because if you experience something, then by definition, that whatever that experience is true. So you know a lot more true things than the younger folks. That's not to say that young folks don't can teach older folks anything. But what has all of this, so living in a society that did, and again, I don't know, maybe this, so how, first of all, how long would you say this outrage porn has been going on? Did it really start in 2016, or was there a prelude to that?
Yeah, I mean, I had on a guest who wrote Tobias Rose Stockwell, who wrote a book called Outrage Machine, which goes into a lot of the history. And so a little bit of it kind of depends a little bit on how you define it, but certainly media intended to rile you up and get you angry has kind of been going on as long as anyone's been writing stuff down, particularly in journalism, right? And you had yellow journalism, you had all kinds of things that were, and for a while in the partisan news was like it was like the norm, like and newspaper for each town, you sort of had two partisan papers. So there was and they were extremely partisan, and they really did say crazy stuff. And so it was almost normal, right? So the this kind of journalism has been around for a long time, but it definitely has ramped up. Um, sort of you saw a big ramp up in the 90s and into talk radio, and then later into and then that carried over into TV channels like Fox and MSNBC, and that is of course carried into now into social media. So it's been around in a lot of ways, and there was back in the day there were like old talk radio shows that were just kind of the shock jocks and stuff like that. So, and there was a guy, Father Flanagan, pre-World War II in the 30s. There was a guy on the radio who was like super pro Hitler and pro Nazism, but
Propaganda.
it was propaganda. But he was like Father Coughlin was his name, and he would do these. It would sort of preach it, and he was like a earthy, down to, you know, kind of guy that people just thought was that he would go into your living rooms on radio. That was when radio was as big as TV, or it was the social media of its day, I guess. And so anyway, this guy had a huge following, right? And but was basically preaching literal Hitler propaganda, and ultimately they shut him down, which was I think only could happen because there was so much concern about the war, that they kind of could break some, and I don't know if they literally broke any rules, but it was like they just shut the guy down because he lost his license, and he was still able to, or he got kicked off a commercial channel, and was able to raise money just like from grassroots people giving him like $2 at a time, was able to buy his own airtime. And so he had a self-funded thing that was funded by the populace, and ultimately they ended up shutting him down. So it goes back all the way to that. So anytime there's media, there's people doing this stuff. But there was definitely a big ramp up of this in the 90s, and it's just been sort of continuing since then. And again, each time there's a presidential election, it seems like it ramps up again.
So it's been amping up since, but it's been around for a while. Maybe social media is just like a bigger megaphone. It just made it louder and it feels worse. But it's effectively it's the same phenomenon that we've been seeing all through the history of media, from radio through TV through now social media.
Yeah,
Okay,
I think the big difference with social media, the big sort of dynamic change in it is the speed, right? So,
right.
you know, Pony Express days, you sort of talk news could travel at the speed of a horse, and now on the internet, you can, things something can go viral in minutes, or hours. And
9, yeah.
it can also, so you have that, and then so it's the speed of it, and also sort of the narrowness of it. So a small niche of people can appear a lot bigger than they are because you can have this collective form that's a worldwide collective. Whereas in the old days, you can do a collective in your little town, and then maybe in your
Right.
county, and then maybe it would take forever to build this larger collective. But now with the internet, it can sort of be this idea that you immediately form this collective from people all over the world, and you instantly either you really are a bit bigger than anything would have been before, but there's also this perception that there's now a big sort of contingent, like there's this huge consensus of these ideas, even though it's actually very, very fringe and it's a tiny segment of the population.
Tiny segment of the population. I would agree
It,
with that.
it can seem big when it's really not.
Yeah. And so what has this taught you about the human condition? How has the and I'm kind of looking at it from the perspective of a random guy, right? So you're a random guy, you figure all this out. What does that teach you about people, and how would you recommend, or how would you tell your son to approach our society as is with social media? What would be a good practice? Is it just stay out, stay away, or be intentional about, what you look at or the kind of channels you listen to? Because it's almost like you're walking out the street, you really can't unsee something. I mean, if it's there, you're gonna see it. If there's a sound, you're gonna hear it. So I guess how do you navigate that, or how would you recommend somebody navigate this?
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely hard. Sometimes, maybe you do really need a detox. I don't think that's a long-term answer for everybody because, it's probably not possible, and B, there may be information there that's useful. So,
Right?
but sometimes you do just need a detox. Like, I got to shut it off for a
Take
while.
a break.
And some people do recommend just getting off. I'm not, some people do say that's an answer, but I think a big one is, like you said, being intentional. And one way to be intentional is to be go in with this lens that there's two lenses to think about. One is there are people that are going to try to take advantage of these psychological tendencies that we have. So two parts of that are A, sort of realizing that we have these psychological tendencies, and we may think we're always rational, and we may think we're the smart one, they're the dumb one, but we're all susceptible to this. And to various degrees, and there's no type of person that has more susceptible than others. It's like, let's get that out of our heads. This could happen to any of us, and we're all doing it. So be cognizant of that you have those psychological tendencies, and then be aware of there are people out there that are trying to take advantage of that. And so you can almost use the fact that you're sort of triggered and riled up as an indicator to step back for a minute, try to look at it from an observer for a second, and get a little bit less caught up in it, and think about some of these big things like, are they telling me the whole story? And being aware that you're getting a skewed version when you're on, well, anywhere, but particularly with social media, because those loud voices are what are getting amplified, right? So you're seeing the loudest of the loud, because a lot of the more rational people have self-selected out, like they're participating less. But
Mhm.
even within those, if they are participating, the loud voices, and even among the loud voices, sort of the loudest and most extreme of the extreme, are what sort of surfaces. And so you get it gives you a misperception of the world, because you can get really depressed. Like, you can go into some of these political groups and see the kind of things that go on in the comment threads, and sort of, because you're getting this skewed version of sort of the 1% of the 1% of the loudest, most crazy voices, it gives you this misperception that the world is
it,
like that.
it it's on fire when in
Yeah,
reality it's really not.
it's really not.
It's
Yeah,
it's
and
easy
and
to
there
someone
aren't
of
as many
perspective.
crazy people as it seems like in real life as it seems like
Yeah,
there are on social media, right? It's not a good representation of your adversaries. Like, if you have political adversaries, what you're seeing on Facebook or any social media is not a good representative of what those adversaries are like. You're seeing the worst of the worst. And so just keep that in mind, that your political adversaries are just like you. Like, they have the same problems you have. They're just trying to get through life. They want to get a job. They want to get their kids in schools. They want to fix the roads. They want to, they want to be able to go to the hospital. I mean, they have the same bunch of the same concerns that we all have, and they're your neighbors. They're not crazy people on social media. Yeah, there's a 1% or whatever small percentage there are that are like that, but that's not who most of them are. And so it's easy to fall into this trap of believing everybody that believes things differently than me
it's
fits that
crazy.
profile of a crazy person, or even worse than crazy. They're like immoral, they're bad, and they have bad
That
intentions.
evil.
They're
Yeah,
evil, yeah. And that's what's really hard to fight when you're on social media, because it can just be depressing, because, like I say, you fall into these comment threads, and you just think, well, the world's falling apart. And we have to keep in mind, like, things have never been better. You
exactly.
know?
And what I take from what you said it makes a lot of sense. I think our listeners should pay attention because you said two things. The second thing you said is really could really be an effective solution. Every time you get triggered, you gotta leverage. If you can leverage that moment to question why you're triggered, that could be a good way to start cutting through the fog, to start seeing how they're using this to actually mess you up.
Right.
You got to use that moment. I like that. That's actually very
Right. It's a good indicator to say somebody's probably telling you a not
yeah.
quite complete story. And yeah, once in a while, it's a total complete story. It makes sense. But that's even okay too, because outrage, there are some things we probably should be outraged about. But the problem with outrage overload, which is what we're in, is people trying to make us outraged about everything all the time, all day long. And there's just not enough hours in the day to be outraged about everything or to even understand all the nuances in all these issues. So we have to be more selective. And what we decide is something to be so outraged about. And yeah, we're going to find our thing. This is our mission. We're going to go be an activist for that or whatever. That's great. There's nothing wrong with outrage per se, but it's this constant state of kind of being dialed up to 11 all day long.
Yeah, it raises your stress levels and so on and so forth. So I want to bring this back now to our present time. What side do you line on? I've spoken to many people about the TikTok ban, and everybody, it's crazy. Like this is the one issue where I have a hard time. I could almost predict the responses to my questions based on your response. I could almost tell what side of the eye you're going to land on. But this is one of those issues where there's a genuine debate. I've seen people on both sides that either could be for or against. Now, I don't. To be completely honest, I don't even know where I land because I'm thinking about this from a what is it called trading parity. So because based on what I understand is I think Facebook, and maybe correct me if I'm wrong, Facebook, Instagram is not really allowed in mainland China. Is that right? And
Mm-hmm.
if that is correct, then that alone is grounds enough for the US government to say, hey, you're not gonna let our folks, do business down there. We're not gonna let you do business down here. But that's I'm gonna leave that alone. Now, where do you land on the TikTok ban issue, and why? What is your perspective on this?
Yeah, well, I want to note that I do think, and I could be wrong because maybe I haven't looked at this close enough in terms of
Yeah,
who aligns with else. I don't think a TikTok ban. I haven't seen a lot of alignment with sort of it being a left or right issue. It
I
seems like there's
agree.
other things
Yeah,
driving it.
yeah,
Um, so for me, both being in the tech world and also having a lot of connections with folks that study some of these international sort of information warfare and other things related to that, um, that I fall on the, I think it definitely they need to you can't have a platform with that kind of power being influenced by the Chinese Communist Party to the level that it is. So that would be my reason for it, because so there's two aspects. A lot of people talk about the sort of backdoors and things like that it might have, and it probably does have because to go into some of this. So there's a company behind TikTok called ByteDance,
it does.
and they are the ones who own the algorithm,
Mm-hmm.
and it's a black box. The American company that is now supposedly owns TikTok doesn't own that algorithm, doesn't control that algorithm. That algorithm is controlled in China, and there's no such thing as an independent company in China, right? I mean, if you have a company, you are under the influence of the Chinese Communist Party, and especially a company with that kind of
Based on
power.
how their structure, their cap structure. Yeah, you're right. Even Elon's company, I think, is part owned. So you really can't be like autonomous in China. That is true for all
Even
companies.
if on paper you say you are or anything else, you're just
Yeah,
not. Like,
you
just
really, yeah,
not
yeah,
how it
you really
works, right?
can't.
So so that just wanted to sort of clear up that part of it. So this company that owns the algorithm part is
Mm-hmm.
what's sort of being banned by the ban, right? So in other words, they have to divest the algorithm, take the Chinese control out of it, or they have to shut it down, I guess, right? Or they're gonna shut it down. And there's gonna be lawsuits and who knows what'll all happen there. But I'm in favor of that because of those two reasons. I mean, one is the backdoors probably exist. Now, for a lot of people, they think that's the big thing. And that's probably the biggest reason why it's banned in a lot of government agencies is because of the threat of there being backdoors and giving up a lot of information about Americans. And so that's there. That's not, I mean, that's a concern, but that's not my biggest one. My biggest one is that it's an information machine. It's a disinformation. It's not. I don't kind of want to avoid that disinformation word, but basically, it's what they. If you look at the Chinese Communist Party agenda, it would be similar to, say, Putin or Iran and others. They want to destabilize and weaken America, right? So one of the ways to do that is to promote all the worst things about America and say, look, see, this democracy thing isn't a very good idea. It's not working that great. And so they're basically trying to take an entire generation of people and make them sort of sour on American democracy, and make them sort of pro-China, even if it's a mildly pro-China, in the sense that, they're never you're not gonna see negative things about China on TikTok. Like, there's been studies that show when you look at the types of things, you're not going to see things about Tiananmen Square. You're not going to see things about Xi Jinping is the same as what is it? Winnie the Pooh, right? You're not going to see stuff like that. You're not going to see, a lot of things about China. You're not going to see things about the Uyghurs and
It's
stuff
not
like that.
surprising, given that it's a communist regime. So it's not surprising to see that they are censoring certain type of information.
Yeah, I mean, yeah. So that's my thing about it, is they're basically poisoning the mind of a whole generation, trying to get them to see America as broken, and that's very dangerous. Right? I mean, that's going to set us up for, people are just going to be ready to take anti-democratic means and all kinds of things. And there's another little there's other aspects of the Chinese Communist Party that they would want to do too. I mean, another message there is for Chinese expats. They're trying to, send this message that, or potential expats, you don't want to go to America. Look, America is even worse, or whatever. America's bad. You don't want to go there. So there's a part of it is about that too, trying to encourage Chinese folks to not go to America, not immigrate there, and this kind of thing. But a bigger piece that is my concern is their influence on American citizens and trying to get them against our own country and basically just create chaos. It's a lot of I don't know if I can use the BS, but the Steve Bannon idea of flood the zone with BS, that's another aspect of it, right? It may not be totally, and you may not see this as clear cut propaganda, but if you just flood the zone with nonsense, people then become distrustful of everything, and now there's sort of no truth, or there's no reliable sources, and that's a very powerful thing. I mean, we saw the Russians did this a lot. Iran is doing it. So this is not unique to China, but TikTok gives China this really powerful tool to just infect the minds of Americans, like, really quickly. And the argument of the free speech thing, I'm curious to see how this plays out in court, but to me has such incredible irony, because there's no free speech in China. Like, you can't say anything about the country. I mean, you will literally, be brought on charges and could be deported. Other things could happen to you. And TikTok itself, like you were talking before, that Facebook and other things are banned in China. And it's not that they're banned. I mean, they have the Great Firewall that just is a whole separate world. You can't access the normal internet in China. But TikTok itself is banned in China. I mean, doesn't that tell you something?
Yeah, that's right. So because based on what I gather, it sounds as though TikTok is actually HQ'd in Singapore. Now, Singapore, China, maybe they have access and all of, but I think you're right that the ByteDance owns 20% of TikTok. And based on how their cap table is structured, I believe they need to basically have like a czar representative within the company that reports directly to the CCP. That is all true. And you can only imagine, the back doors. Somebody even suggested that TikTok effectively makes American phones active, passive listening devices. They could literally decide if they wanted to listen to what this conversation we're having right now and say I had or you had TikTok, they literally could. We don't know that is true, but that's hypothetical. Now, is there anything that TikTok has done? Now, assume TikTok was an American company. Is there anything TikTok has done that Facebook or Google or Instagram has not done? Is it just the fact that it's the Communist Party, or is it the fact that they are doing what American companies are doing, or is it both?
Yeah, well, I think there's a big difference. There is a difference. And one is that if we were to decide there was some accountability, or we want to do anything, want it with some teeth, we couldn't do anything with ByteDance, right? You can't indict somebody in China. They're not going to come here. Like, they're not going to be extradited. So one difference is, even if they're doing similar things, we would have no account. There's no accountability to the United States rule of
So at
law.
least we have a justice system where we can bring Facebook, Google to book, and we can take them to court, to Congress or whatever, and make them answer questions and disclose stuff to us. Okay.
In terms of what they're doing or not doing, it's a little bit hard now because all of these platforms have become less transparent about what's going on, right? And with TikTok, they never were transparent. They talked about doing something and never did. Um, but Facebook and Twitter have both kind of pulled back. Like Twitter used to have the fire hose, they pulled that back and made it commercial. So there's not academics can't really look at that as readily as they could. Facebook had a thing called Crowd Tangle, I think it was called, where academics could get access to Facebook data anonymized. They've shut that down. So all of these sites have become a bit more black box. But of course, the one in China is going to be the ultimate black box. They're not going to know anything about it, right? But so we're not sure. We know that it's not easy to tell, but from the small studies that have been done, the biggest difference is probably just the alignment with the Chinese Communist Party goals. But because I think so there are some small differences there that have clearly been there, but a lot of it is hard to tell because it's sort of subtle in the messaging, right? They aren't really coming out and say China's great, US is bad. It's all this subtle, kind of messaging that just gets your mindset working in that direction. And so it's a little hard to tell. But even if they are doing similar things, I would say but a big thing to just realize that they're under different motivation, right? I mean, Facebook
Yeah.
and Twitter and the others, primarily, I think Twitter's a little bit unknown, but certainly Facebook, Instagram, and that they're motivated by profits. Like they want you to get engaged, they want to sell more expensive ads. And so their
That's
engine
fair.
is sort of driven by that. Now it happens, maybe some of those effects are similar to the TikTok one that's more driven by, I mean, they have that need as well. Like they want to get engagement because they want the platform to grow and all that. So they have some of that going on as well. But, they also have this other Communist Party, trying to align with Communist Party goals. And so even if they might have do some similar things in the end, I think the motivations being so different also play into this. But yeah, I mean, it's sort of interesting that the Facebook, from what everyone can tell, Facebook didn't actually go out and hire a bunch of psychologists and come up with an algorithm that would mess with our minds. All they did is have a system that would just keep promoting stuff that got more engagement. And just through that, it turned really hostile to us.
Okay. So a couple of things. I have a couple of thoughts here. So what I think I heard you say is that there's truly from like a practical perspective, like practically speaking, you could take out the ownership of all these companies. They all basically are doing the same thing to us. But the I think the nuance with TikTok is that not only because I firmly believe that China, be it their Facebook, Google, or Instagram and all the other social media platforms, they still do have access. I don't. They could have gotten access by hacking because I think I heard I don't know what podcast I was watching. Maybe it was the All In. They had people infiltrate the C-suite of Google. They had people at Facebook and so on and so forth. So they have been able to have that access. But I guess with TikTok, not only they have the access, they can leverage it and play games on us. They can pull some tricks on us, be it yeah, pushing a certain type of messaging or tweaking the algorithm so that we can't really see the truth about what's really happening outside of China, within China from the outside, and so on and so forth. So in a nutshell, I think that TikTok is worst quite literally because it's in the hands of China. So let's say hypothetically, and by the way, I do also know that they did some type of data migration oversaw by Oracle. I think they did that last year. So officially, all the data of the U.S. TikTok users are actually housed on U.S. soil in Texas, and it was oversaw by China. And apparently, at least the claim, it sounds as though so TikTok America and TikTok, wherever else, it's really not the same. Like our data is in here, but you can still, so technically speaking, since the algo is not owned by us, they could still technically access that data somewhere. I guess that's what the deal is, and so that allows you to land on that side. I get it. My take on it is I'm really torn on this issue because I feel as though China, regardless, is going to have access to our data, whether be it TikTok or not TikTok. And I also know that it's true. India decided not to let TikTok in. Other countries, Europe, it's been banned at the federal government, even at the level of the European Union, it's been banned everywhere. I think those people know something. It can't just be, just because they don't like China. There's got to be something quite serious that they probably can't disclose, because maybe if they disclose, then they're going to reveal how they figured it out. And China is going to figure out, oh, this is how you're spying on us or whatever. So they
Right.
probably know something. I get it. But the only true line that I see is the fact that there's no parity, is the fact that if you're gonna sell tobacco on my store, you're gonna have let me sell tobacco on yours or whatever product I decided I wanted to do the same. So you can't just come to my market and sell me whatever you want and tell me, hey, you can't do that to me. I really think that's not fair. That's the only rational argument. But outside of that, I really don't think that TikTok is much different than the other platforms from a operational perspective. But again, they're owned by China, so that kind of puts them in a tough
Well,
spot.
not even the ownership, it's the control that I'm concerned about,
Well,
right?
yeah,
Because
that's what I mean. The
that they
control
have the algorithm,
of the
that
algorithm.
they is, and so that'll what be interesting about if they sell it, they'll have to the algorithm won't come with it. So it's not gonna be worth as much because someone's gonna
Which
have to
is,
make a new
yeah.
algorithm from scratch.
But then now let's look at it now from the American citizens' perspective. You have 170 million Americans using this app. I'm one of them. My spouse is. I know a whole bunch of people that are using the app. And I can tell you that the algo is powerful, it's compelling. That thing can suck you. You can be on there for hours. You really could, if you're not like intentional about say, okay, I'm gonna stop now. It can take you. I went to cut my hair yesterday. My barber told me that he didn't sleep. He went 24 hours without sleep. When I asked him why, he said, "Oh man, I just ended up on TikTok, and next thing I knew, it was like 6 in the morning. He stayed all night on the app, and he didn't even see the time go through." So there's some truth to the fact that it's a powerful algorithm. It really is. It does. I don't know what it does, but it does something to you. And so but I feel like it kind of sucks for Americans, because this app is allowing a lot of people to start small businesses, to do something that's kind of useful and productive to society, and it's gonna hurt them. So how do you then, as an American person, feel about the fact that the federal government is gonna take away a tool that is gonna allow you to express yourself as you choose to. You could choose Facebook or Instagram, but you chose TikTok. Now, how do you feel about the fact that the federal government is gonna say no, you can't have TikTok? How does that make you feel?
Yeah, I mean, for me, the threat is not worth the benefit. I mean, unfortunately, folks sort of fell into it without realizing what they were getting into. But there is an argument. There's a bunch of arguments there. I mean, I think one of in terms of the banning it, one of the best ones that you were sort of hinting at is like we couldn't do the same thing to China. Like we couldn't create a TikTok and suddenly and capture the minds of a bunch of Chinese people because they won't allow any apps there, right, at all. So that's an asymmetry that exists, as you know. But yeah, so I think another one, my wife was pointing this out to me, that a ban of TikTok could sort of backfire, right? If the goal, as I'm talking about, is that I don't want this influence of people turning on America, sort of because of this influence, I guess, to summarize it short. It could backfire
Yeah,
that people will
it could
basically
backfire.
be mad at TikTok or be mad at the government for
Yep.
shutting off TikTok, and there you achieve the same thing again. So there's no, you win, you lose, you win. I mean, I don't know. It's one of those things.
Yeah. And I think, believe it or not, I think this is one of those issues that most Americans, a hill that a lot of Americans are going to be willing to die on, given how much, because there's people that out of the blue, in a matter of weeks or months, started up businesses that was generating tens, 20, 30,000, thousands and thousands of dollars. I know at least one person that was able to do that. So it is powerful, and people have used it to transform their life. And I can see how, I don't know what percentage of the 170 Americans are actually, small business owners, but there's a lot of people. I don't know if you've actually taken the time to look at that app. It's crazy. But from that perspective, I feel like it's basically our current president signing this into law has basically committed political suicide, because I don't understand how he would be able to do this and turn around and expect the same people on this app to turn around and vote for him. I really think that he basically just handed, you know, for better or for worse, that could be a good thing because I personally don't fancy him as our leader currently, but still, I don't know, man. I'm really torn because I see the side of the citizen that's actually benefiting from the app, and I also see the geopolitical implications of allowing them to use this app. And so the divestiture that Congress is actually kind of forcing them to do now, if it doesn't pass, the ban goes through. This could really make people mad, and just like I said, it really could backfire. I don't know. It's maybe China just really maybe have just checkmated
Yep, it's a little bit of
America.
a checkmate.
Yeah. It really could be a checkmate. Like that is
Yeah.
that is that is high level chess right there. But
Yeah,
anyway,
I think there's some truth to that for sure. I mean, it's going to have its negative consequences either way.
it definitely will. So I have a couple more questions for you. I actually have a question that I got from my spouse. She wants me to ask this to all my guests, but I have one of mine that I really like to ask. It's a little bit on the philosophic or esoteric side, so to speak. So what is your philosophy of life, and why do you believe it?
I'm sorry, what was the second part?
What is your life philosophy or your philosophy of life, and why do you believe it?
Yeah, I probably I might get a different answer on different days. I'm not sure. I don't know if I haven't nailed down that clearly. Um, I think that, yeah, philosophy of life. Primarily we're sort of in this together, and but we're kind of our own worst enemy sometime. And so sort of staying on that path of realizing we're in this together, and that we sort of can't do it alone. And I think that helps put a lot of the other things. Because like when you first mentioned it, I thought of a lot of things like family and sort of community and things like that. But I think the sort of foundational thing about we're sort of in it together sort of brings all that other stuff together, right? Like that's the reason for maintaining those friendships. That's the reason for um, supporting family and being there for them and that kind of stuff. So I guess that's a big piece of it is that sort of trying to stay true to that we're sort of in this together. And when I meet somebody in the grocery store and they're annoying me, just remembering that we're in this together and uh and maybe giving them a break. Like they might have had a bad day. I don't know. Like I don't know their life. That kind of stuff. So I think that's maybe a fundamental aspect that kind of then feeds into these other things of just sort of the golden rule and things like that maybe all kind of feed into that. I guess that would be my main philosophy.
So what do you think makes us human?
with with AI
I know.
with AI pushing the edge of this. I mean, it's a very hard question, right? I mean,
Yeah, it is. Now it's becoming harder and harder to figure out. It was always a hard question, but now it's like, whoa,
yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, and and I'm not sure I know the answer to be honest with you, because almost anything I could come up with, I think I could also come up with a counter argument saying AI could do the same thing.
Okay.
But but yeah, what we think of, I think a big thing that I think of just intuitively, right, without getting too going deep into the philosophy, that'll probably be wrong. It's just that's the things about like creativity, right, and the things about that um, genuine connection that again, you could probably argue robots can do all these things, but that genuine idea of the idea of genuine connection seems like such a human thing that that we we can have that internal sense of those connections, and we can keep them in our mind so that even when the people are not around, literally right now, those all those that connectiveness is there, right? And I don't know,
Emotions.
that seems like a very human thing.
So emotions tend to be a human, unique to humans. In, I mean, as you see it, we can be emotional. We care about people. We love. We cry. We hurt over something happening to somebody. We never know. Like if I went out now and I saw a wreck and somebody, that didn't make it, that would really sadden me. It's. I guess I think that's kind of what you're kind of alluding to, that ability to connect to other humans and just really genuinely care. You know.
And in an abstract way where we can actually sort of bring that into ourself so that that connectivity sort of persists even when we're not with those people, and even people that are gone from our lives forever, there's connectivity there as well. But it's like that connectivity, um I think is a very human thing that we can maintain so much sort of information about these personalities, and then and keep that connectivity going, and that then enriches our personality.
Okay. I've got one more from me, and then, well, let me ask you the one from my wife, then I'll ask you the last
Okay.
one. So, what would you tell the younger you? What would you tell your younger self if you could travel back in time and tell yourself something that you think would be really useful for you in your future? What would it be?
Well, I'm pretty sure, first of all, I probably wouldn't listen to myself. My younger self probably wouldn't have heard me anyway. But
I've heard this response a few times. It's crazy, but yeah, carry on.
but that doesn't mean I couldn't try. I think the biggest one would be be humble,
Okay.
and in particularly in relationships,
Okay.
um, and sort of go take the extra effort. Like, these relationships are going to matter to you. Take the extra effort to keep them and nurture them. Um, and they're going to really matter to you someday. If you don't feel like they matter to you now, they're going to matter to you.
Okay. I've got a list of four um, future technologies that have been developed, mostly in America, even outside of America. So you have robo taxis from Tesla, right? You've got energy, solar, or fusion. Energy is the second one. Then I have what's the third one? The third one is, so we've got robo taxis, we've got energy, we've got Optimus, like humanoid robots, and then what's the fourth one? We got Optimus, we got robo taxis, we got humanoid robots, and then okay. So with these three futuristic technologies, right? What do you think has the highest market potential in terms of you know revenue, and what do you think has the highest impact, positive impact on our society moving forward? And just for context, Tesla is developing robo taxis, no drivers. You have a couple of companies working on basically powering American houses. Everybody has solar, therefore we don't need the grid. And there's a lot of rationale behind why energy prices are going up, even though the cost of producing energy is really not going up. They just have this ginormous combination of legislation and infrastructure issues with our grid that makes it to where, and depending on the state, in Cali it's more expensive to, your electricity is more expensive in Cali versus Oklahoma and so on and so forth. And then you have your humanoid robots that, good example will be Optimus that Tesla is developing. What do you think has the most positive impact overall and why?
And you said four, but I only have three. Or is there a fourth or no?
Oh no, no, no. Let's go with this three. I was thinking of
Just
something
three.
else, but yeah, let's go with three.
Okay. Well, I think long term, I would say, I would say the energy arena. Now, that may be longer term, right? I mean, there's going to be probably a lot of other things happening in some of those other spaces sooner, but But I think long term, the energy situation has got to be dealt with, and that either means lowering demand or coming up with ways to uh, fulfill that demand. So I think I'm optimistic there, and I do think that there will be things, but I think that's the area. And I don't think I'm not optimistic that solar is a magic solution to this. I mean, I think it's
Okay.
stopgap when we do stuff, but I think, certainly fusion, and there may even be other technologies as we go forward. But I see that being probably the biggest impact. And, in terms of profitability and all that, sure.
Mhm.
I don't know. I'd probably because this for the same reason is going to be the
Right.
biggest one. But yeah, I mean, I see the day of sort of personal compact fusion reactors and stuff like that, right?
Yeah, I think both Voyager 1 and 2 are running on nuclear, right? You could imagine something similar that creates enough energy to where just like you could put a solar panel on your roof with some batteries, you could put that in your house or your ranch or something like that, and then you don't need the grid and everything else. So energy is your number one, and what's your number two?
Oh, on that, I guess I guess on that list, wow. I mean, I think near term the robo taxis thing, but I think humanoid robots are going to be a big part. I think that's going to become sort of normal. Like that will become normalized. Like people will just find that reasonable. Like that'll just be and those will go range. Well, we have Star Trek, right? And our Star Wars and all that. So those will range from the more mechanical type ones to literally more that are trying to mimic humans a little more probably. And to be honest with you, I don't know which direction that will go. The probably demands for both. I mean, I think you see
Yeah,
this sex robot thing is like a serious market, right? So I think that's
I've been
people are
hearing about
lonely.
that. Yeah,
Yeah,
This-
people are lonely, and I think that's going to be a real thing. Like we sort of joke about it, but I think people are lonely, and they will have robot girlfriends.
so is that because based on what I see, look, it sounds as though it's an Asian thing at this point. Is it really an American thing? A
You're
lot of
right. I think I think I that's what I've heard as well. That so far that's starting to be something that's happening, and I think some of it is I've heard it relates to I think in Japan was one example where like
Yep.
the working conditions there it's just sort of normal to work just these massive amount of hours and there's no really any free time. So like there's no time for dating and things like that, which
Yeah,
is I don't know if all that's sort of true, but I believe that's kind
I've
of what I
heard
was
some
reading
similar
about.
things. Yeah, okay. So
Um,
so looking at the next 10 years, in your opinion, energy would be the biggest game changer in our society. And when you say energy, what exactly are you thinking about? You said not solar. Are you thinking about a specific type of technology or is it just energy, period?
Well, I was thinking energy in the big picture of all types, but my only point about solar is I'm not necessarily naming any of these kind of current technologies as some magic silver bullet. I mean, I think they'll all have places and we'll be doing stuff with all of them, but I definitely don't see overnight solar being some magical solution. And maybe there'll be different ways of leveraging it that it will be because yeah, the sun's there, it's all over the place. So maybe there'll be better ways of leveraging it. But my main point was just saying that the idea of just like solar, I don't see like solar panels necessarily becoming like a
Like,
real yeah. I think the challenge with a lot of that stuff is that's rotating like cost benefit, and getting return on investment in that is going to be a challenge, I think, for a while. But I think in 10 years, I'm not sure energy is the right answer in 10 years. I mean, in 10 years, I think just straight AI of all kinds is going to be the bigger impact than any of these. I think energy is a longer term game to me. Energy is on the 25 year.
yeah, range. Okay. Yeah, I think AI is gonna basically impact every industry depending to different extents. Some industries more so than others. We've already seen the first, and it's funny because every time a new technology comes around, we always think it's the blue collar workers that are gonna take the hit. But
Right.
it's funny how it hit us first. Like the very people that created it actually suffered, which is a whole story to talk about on its own. But yeah, so
Yeah,
it's
I
gonna.
mean the new hot job's going to be like welder and
I know.
all these other trade jobs, right? I mean, and
Yeah.
it's not that robots won't ultimately be able to do some of that stuff, but like right now, the incentive is not to have them do that, right? I mean, it's a lot easier to replace the people doing stuff at desks like us, right?
Yep. It's much easier to replace people that are writing code or work doing some type of workflow type job. So if anything where you need to click a screen, type something, send an email, analyze a paper, or anything that is software is kind of related, all those soft skills. But it's kind of difficult to automate a job function end to end. I see opportunities where AI can be verticalized, right? So you can have this
Hmm.
specific job functions like straight up like co-piloting, right? Writing code, that's an obvious one. Or maybe something like having an intranet, like a chatbot that knows your company in and out, and then
Right.
any employee can ask you anything, and you know exactly, what to say and where to direct that person. So I see AI going everywhere, but I do think that like for instance, what I do, we basically do a combination of analysis and configuration. Now there are aspects of my job that I can clearly see you can automate, but it's very difficult to automate the whole thing. So I guess it's gonna be a situation where you can kind of amplify your productivity. So if you give me an AI that knows how to do part of what I do, I guess I could just do a whole lot more. Instead of working on one project, configuring one module in a week, I could do 5 or 10. That just kind of makes me more productive. That's kind of how I see it, anyways. So,
Well, yeah, I mean, I think AI is going to raise some questions about things like basic income and stuff like that
oh
sort of
yeah.
sooner than anybody wants to, because I think it is gonna have massive impact to the job market.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely, for sure, for sure.
And it's going to
Hey,
raise some societal questions, I think, too, that
oh
we maybe
yes,
didn't want to ask this soon.
universal basic income, whatever that means.
Right, exactly. What does that even mean? Yeah.
What does that really mean? It's interesting. But a world where you have robots, if you have a humanoid robot that can basically do most of what humans can do, outside of things that require some critical, creative, analytical, or requires you to be creative and imaginative, solve a problem creatively. Outside of that, there's a whole lot of things that you can automate. If I had a human robot that could come to this office and fix it up and go do the dishes, do the laundry, mow the lawn, get in the car and drive it, right? That I see value in that. But again, I don't know what the ROI is. If a robot like it is gonna cost me $100,000, is it really worth me spending that much versus just the little things I have to do, just finding time on the weekend and doing it? I don't
Right.
know. So yeah, it could go either way. So I am very, very excited, man. It's been an amazing conversation. I just want to say thank you. This random guy reached out to me and he decided to say yes. I really appreciate it. And if you're open to, we might have to do a second round because there's a whole lot of other things I wanted to get into that we didn't get to, and I was just looking at it. I was like, oh my god, we're already way over. We're way past the hour, so I'll probably have to schedule something else with you. Um, any last thoughts, comments for our audience? Where can they find you? Social media? Do you have handles, or do you have a website where? How do they get in contact with you if they're interested?
Yeah, my main site for all this is called outrageoverload.net, and there's all my contact is on there, and I reply to everything I see, and it has all my socials at Outrage Overload most places. But then and it has my email and everything else too. So feel free to reach out. I always love to make new connections and hear from real people.
Oh, that's awesome. Thank you very, very much. I appreciate you taking the time. And awesome. You made it to the end of the Outrage Overload episode. Thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate it. Don't forget to like, share, comment, and subscribe. And most importantly, I love getting some feedback. So go ahead and leave your comments below. I've gotten some feedback so far, and so far so good. I like to have thought-provoking conversations. It's good. Um, so Outreach Overload, that's how you can reach him. This is his website. You can all his social media handles are on here, but I'm gonna add this at the in the description below. Just I just want to say thank you, David, for hanging out with me for a couple of hours. I appreciate it. We'll probably be having David on the show for round two. Let me know what you guys think in the comments below. Thank you again for watching. I appreciate it. This was Think with Armel episode number 4. I encourage you guys to go watch the other episode. If you haven't watched my other shows, go ahead and scroll up. You find the other episodes, and I always like to get some feedback. So feel free to comment, share, like, and subscribe. So that way, every time I post a new episode, you get to watch it first. Thank you. I'll catch you guys on the next one. Bye bye.